Okay, comparing those two graphs. How many more pizzas were ordered by phone than on the internet? How many more pizzas were ordered by phone? Which graph, the important thing here is not the actual answer, but which graph shows that. Which graph can you get that information from more clearly? Actual numbers. What do you think? The pictograph, right? This allows you to look at numbers pretty easily. Okay, pictograph. If you explain, I mean, you've probably explained it somehow. I'm just going to say it. I'm not going to write it, but make sure you've written something there. This, a pictograph shows numbers. You can easily look and say, well, there's 10 of them. Each little pizza is 10, so I can count it up, right? Can you get that information from the circle graph? If you wanted to, could you figure it out? Yeah, because it says this is 125 orders, but you'd have to do a lot of work, wouldn't you? You'd have to figure out, the phone, 48% of that. You'd have to figure out what 48% of that is. You'd have to figure out, well, actually, you could do it a little quicker, couldn't you? How many more? What would be a quicker way of doing that? What do you think? Instead of figuring out what 48% of 125 is, and then figuring out what 20% of 125 is, and then subtracting those numbers, what would be a quicker way of doing it? What do you think? Well, you could do the pictograph's way faster, but is there a faster way of doing it with this rather than figuring out what rather than figuring out what's 48% of 125 and figuring out what 20% of 125 is and then subtracting those numbers? Couldn't you just say, well, look at the difference in percentages? Couldn't you just figure out what 28% of 125 is? That'd be a bit quicker, but you still have to do some figuring. This pictograph shows better numbers if you're interested in actual numbers. Part B here. Almost half the total number of orders came by phone. Which shows that more clearly? Which graph shows that more clearly? The circle graph, right? Circle graph shows you fractions like that, right? Half of it, a quarter of it, 3/4 of it. It shows you proportions out of the whole. Okay? Half the total number. A circle graph is best for showing portions of the entire thing. Okay, circle graph. It displays the fractions visually. What about the third one here? Which graph shows the number of pizzas ordered by... Which graph better shows the number of pizzas ordered by internet? That's sort of the same as part A, isn't it? It's this one, right? That one shows the number better because you can just count it up. You can figure it out from the other one, but it's more obvious from the pictograph. Would a line graph be useful to display this data? Remember what a line graph is good for, and would it be useful to display this? Why not? What do you think?
Because there's not enough numbers.
There's not enough numbers. There are only 3 numbers here, but remember, let's go back here. What does a line graph show you? The big reason is we have numbers, like we have numbers of sales, but for a line graph, you need what on the bottom here? What do you need? You need time, right? If it's something over time or a progression, as was mentioned here, if it's sequential like that, then you can use a line graph. If it was sales in week 1, week 2, week 3, week 4, then you could use a line graph. But it's not. It's not sales in week 1, week 2, week 3. It's sales in different categories. So it would not be very useful for that. No. It's not data over time. Right? Or something like that. And the last one here. What other type of graph could be used to display this data? What do you think? You could use a bar graph. Anytime you can use a pictograph, you can usually use a bar graph, and vice versa, right? Good. There is a question here that I'm going to ask you to do in a minute or two. It's a related question, and you can kind of mark it after and see how you're doing. We may use these right away after we do the example. We may use them next class. Well, it just depends on how things go here. I think right now instead we're going to leave that for now and use it later. And we're going to look at the second example. All right. Now this is going to be one where you have to make a graph. They tell you what type of graph to make. Okay. And then it asks you some questions about other types of graphs, okay, in a second. A double bar graph, remember, what does a double bar graph allow you to do? What does it allow you to do? Yeah, compare two sets of data. So what are our two sets of data here across a bunch of categories? Maybe we should skip back to the graph to see. A double bar graph, you need categories, and you need your two different things that the data is for, right? And then numbers. So what are our numbers? What are our two things? And what are our categories here? Whoa, skipping all over. What do you think? What are our categories here? What's going to be, let's just have a rough kind of a outline of what this graph's going to look like. What are the two things you're comparing? What do you think? Somebody hasn't said anything? These two different players here, right? From that you're comparing. Absolutely, right? Those are going to be your two different things. So you're going to have a bar for each of them. But what are our categories going to be down here? If these are the two different things in each category, what are the categories going to be down on the bottom? This is lots of, let's read it again to be specific here, to display this data. What do you think? What's going to be on the bottom? Can we show all of this all at once, this data? What can we show? What might you make? There's a lot of different, I should actually let you do it and see what you come up with here. You can, if you want to compare these two players, if you're thinking about total points here, if we're talking about total points, if we want, we can make a double bar graph here with the seasons. You could go 1, 2, 3. You could show the seasons if you want. You could do total points. And then you could do the two players for each bar, right? You could do that, or whatever it is. So you could do that stuff. It would be pretty difficult to do all of these for all of these seasons for both players. That's kind of too much to do. So let's create a graph that just shows total points over 3 seasons for those two players. Okay? And then we'll think about what other kind of graph we can make. So you go ahead and try and make a graph there.